Okay, we're at step five, and I did want to go back and say some things about step four before we move on because I believe I neglected to say them in the last session. I think I did. And some of that because of the way that is set up about kind of who's involved, what happened, what does it affect, and what's my part. I think sometimes that can lead to some confusion or issues with folks that have been through some, let's say, some early childhood trauma, um, some some families in which they were treated poorly, and or not even families, communities, wherever. And that last question can kind of throw you for a loop about what was my part, because in uh, childhood abuse, there's no part. Like it's not, oh well, let me look at what I did wrong to make this happen. That's not at all that part, and so that can throw you off a little bit if you're prone to kind of always looking for that. So perhaps then in that last, depending on where you are, this is it's up to you. I mean, these are your steps to do. So you could put nothing, absolutely put nothing, depending on where you are in the healing process. Uh, the other thing that I found helpful was that I didn't have a part, I didn't do anything to deserve this, but I have held on to it. I've held on to it for a long time, and I either was kind of in denial about it or I didn't deal with it. I minimized it. And there were times that because of that, I treated others differently, because there's this huge part that I just kind of didn't look at. Just because you don't look at trauma doesn't mean it doesn't uh, impact your daily life and doesn't kind of inform decisions and behaviors, and not, again, not an excuse but just a context. So maybe that was your part, that you've held on to it, and maybe you weren't ready to deal with it. No problem, it's not a judgment, it's just kind of get to that last question. Step four. Step four is tough. It's this inventory, it's this this searching look at kind of what's going on. So um, a couple things. One, if we go into the original manuscript, the only part that they thought about, Bill didn't write it, but one of the editors looked at it and said, after God admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, do we want to again add God as you understand him? And Bill made the decision, or someone made a decision, that no, we're kind of we've set the foundation for it's your understanding. They do, it is capital G God, but that's just kind of what this book is based on, and therefore the program is. But they left it as it was. So Bill was also, if you look at the writings, he did not like repetition, and he didn't love using the same phrase or language in steps. And so that could have been as simple as that, or it could have been, look, we're at a point now where you're ready to hear it. And so there's a couple of things that step five is about that I think it's overlooked a lot, right? When I think of step five, I think, oh, that's the part where you tell your sponsor. You tell your sponsor about what's in the fourth step. And that's not what the fifth step talks about. I mean, that can be one part of it, but it starts with God, admitting to God, and then ourselves, and then another human being. And I don't think this language is by accident. I think everything is very purposeful here. So it's this step really is about building on this connection with a higher power, building on a deeper relationship with God. It is about kind of taking this self inventory and looking at ourselves, what's on this paper. And then it's about telling someone else, for purposes of humility, connection, and again, really kind of helping it come through more in us by speaking with someone else. It talks a lot about the dangers of kind of keeping your own counsel and where that could go wrong. So um, in the 12 and 12, it talks about this idea of loneliness. And it talks about how um, almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. And it says this predates our drinking, that we always had this feeling that we didn't quite belong. And we dare not draw near to others, and we're kind of quiet and shy, or the other side of the coin, noisy good fellows craving attention and companionship. So it talks about this loneliness because it says we thought when we got to AA and met with people that were like us, like, oh, this is where I belong, this is where I fit. It makes a point to be careful that can be false. That can be a false sense of belonging. It just says we thought our isolation problem had been solved, but we soon discovered that we weren't alone in a social sense anymore. We still suffered many of the old pangs of anxious apartness. So meetings good, the unity, the fellowship good, but the true connection comes when we can talk with complete candor. Candor, of our conflicts, and listen to someone else do the same thing. Um, we still didn't belong. So step 5 was the answer, and then this incredible line: it is the beginning of true kinship with man and God. So step 5 is about loneliness, and it also it is about humility, because it says this is another great dividend that we can expect from it. And it talks about how when we keep our own counsel, we can kind of trick ourselves in this, and kind of again get a false sense of humility, because it says what comes to us alone may be garbled by our own rationalization and wishful thinking. That's been my life. Garbled is a light term, but my own rationalization and wishful thinking. So it also talks about humility. Now, I really, really prefer the writings in the 12 step, but I got to tell you that the big book here really gets it really well. And so we start in Bill's story. And so remember, Ebby came to visit Bill and said, look, this is what happened to me. And, you know, Bill listened and shared some of the issues that he had. And then Bill started going through the steps straight away without kind of having them listed. He just kind of went through them intuitively, which is where this came from. And so it spends a lot of time on the second step in here, but then it really does put, I mean, if you look at kind of page 13 here, I mean, there's 3 through 12. Bill goes through all the steps right here, and it's pretty. Again, that's how he did it. And so again, Ebby kind of sits with him in the hospital. He goes through this. Um, he was separated from alcohol, which he says is really important. Um, and then he talks in the 4th step about you know admitting for the first time that myself was nothing, and without him, capital H, I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. And I have not had a drink since. Now, what can be confusing is you can think he's talking about Ebby, but friend is capitalized, so he's talking about God. So it's not Ebby. And then remember, Ebby's his very old friend. So newfound friend is God. And then it goes on to say, my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. Then it goes into 8 and 9. So that was Bill's fifth step. But if we go into action, again, it really hits on some of these issues about um, humility, loneliness, this ego deflation, but also this reconnection with God and man. And this really brings us closer and talks about finding full. Usually we're good with self-appraisal, but in this case it was severely lacking. And it says over and over in here, if you don't do this, you're going to drink again. And it doesn't say you might. It says uh, if you skip it, you may not overcome drinking. And then in the next line, it says, trying to avoid this humbling experiences, they have turned to easier methods, almost invariably got drunk. And so it talks about that they never completed their housekeeping because they only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They tricked themselves by thinking, oh, I've done this, I've written all this out. But until they learn more about humility, fearlessness, and honesty, which is in talking to someone else, they don't really get through the step. And so it really hits on that a couple times. And then it also talks about when we decide who will hear our story. And most people pick their sponsor, but it's clear you don't have to. It's whoever you choose to take this. And then it talks about once we've done this, what will happen. And there's some promises listed here, and they're pretty great. Withholding nothing, we're delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Be alone. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Pretty great. And then it talks about we're not done now, or after talking to someone, you go home, and it talks about sitting quietly for about an hour and reviewing what's been done up to this point in your steps, and really making sure it's been thorough, and making sure it talks about kind of building this arch for which we're going to walk through, and talk about are all the stones in their place properly? Do we skimp on any concrete? That kind of thing. Um, and so it talks about thinking about it, and then sitting, um, that we're now ready to move on to these other steps after we have kind of thoroughly thought this through, and then reading the initial 5 proposals that goes on to the other steps. So again, not just reading it to a sponsor. There's a lot more to it, but what a what a wonderful promise or promises we get by virtue of doing this. As hard as we may think it is, at the end of it, closer to the higher power, closer to someone else, gaining humility, losing fear, and losing this idea of I'm somehow different, somehow I don't belong, somehow there's this otherness about me. And this is the beginning of the end of that. And it's said a lot of meetings, a lot of times that people kind of who get stuck on the 4th step and don't move on and don't do a thorough 5th step really kind of get in a lot of trouble. And the literature tells us because of thorough housekeeping. So again, difficult is not impossible. We did some really difficult things to drink and drug. I mean, I did some really difficult things to get what I needed to get. So at this point, I don't know that I would have used the idea, well, this is really hard, for a way to not do this. Um, Not a great reason. My life is on the line. My togetherness with people, all these fears, all these insecurities, all this trauma is on the line. So, not a bad way to start. Really, not a bad deal to make. That I just have to tell someone else, and God, and then myself, and then I start to have a connection with people, which is pretty incredible. So that's the fifth step.